The girl stood in the center of the auction yard with her hands bound in front of her, rope cutting into wrists so small they looked like they might snap. Her dress was gray, patched at the elbows, torn at the hem. Dust clung to the fabric like it had grown there. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stood with her head down, dark hair falling across her face, shoulders pulled inward like she was trying to disappear into herself. Lot 17, the auctioneer called, his voice flat and businesslike. Girl, maybe 12, 13 years old, healthy, no family, no debts, clean slate. Been through 3 placements already, so she knows how to work. A few men in the crowd chuckled. The girl flinched but didn't look up. It was 1867, 2 years after the war had ended, but auctions like this still happened in the valleys where law didn't reach and memory was short. They didn't call it slavery anymore. They called it indenture, placement, Christian charity. The words changed. The chains stayed the same. Elias Stone stood at the back of the crowd, hat pulled low, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He hadn't come here to buy anything. He'd come because he'd heard rumors, whispers in the town of Coldwater that children were being sold off like cattle, that families torn apart by the war were being auctioned to the highest bidder under the guise of orphan relief. He told himself he just needed to see it with his own eyes to confirm it was real. Now he wished he hadn't. The auctioneer gestured toward the girl. She can cook, clean, mend, strong back for her size. Start the bidding at $20. 10, someone shouted. 15, another voice called. The girl's shoulders tightened, her fingers curled into fists, rope digging deeper. Elias felt something twist in his chest, something old and sharp. He'd spent the last 5 years trying to forget the war, trying to bury the things he'd seen and the things he'd done. He'd bought a patch of land outside Coldwater, built a cabin, and lived alone. No neighbors, no questions, no ghosts. But this girl, standing there like a lamb led to slaughter, dragged every ghost back to the surface. 20, a man near the front said. He was broad-shouldered, thick-armed, with a beard that hung to his chest. I'll take her. The auctioneer grinned. $20, going once. 25, Elias heard himself say. Heads turned. The auctioneer squinted toward the back of the crowd. 25 from the man in the gray coat. Do I hear 30? The bearded man glanced back, eyes narrowing. 30. Elias stepped forward, weaving through the crowd. 40. The murmurs grew louder. The girl's head lifted slightly, just enough for Elias to catch a glimpse of her face. Pale, hollow-cheeked, eyes like bruised glass. $40, the auctioneer repeated, voice rising with greed. Do I hear 50? The bearded man spat into the dirt. 50, and that's my last. Elias reached the front of the crowd. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat, opened it, and dumped a handful of coins onto the auctioneer's table. They clattered loud in the silence. 60, he said. The auctioneer's grin widened. $60, going once, going twice. He paused, looking at the bearded man, who glared but said nothing. Sold to the man in gray. The crowd began to disperse. The auctioneer scooped up the coins, counted them twice, then nodded to one of his men, who cut the rope binding the girl's wrists. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the edge of the table. She's all yours, the auctioneer said, sliding a folded paper across the table. Contract's good for 10 years. After that, she's free to go, or you can renew if she's worth keeping. Elias stared at the paper. His hands didn't move. The girl stood beside him now, close enough that he could hear her breathing, short, shallow, uneven. She smelled like sweat and fear and wood smoke. Take the contract, the auctioneer said, impatient now, or I'll sell her to the next man. Elias picked up the paper. It was thick, official-looking, stamped with a seal he didn't recognize. He folded it and shoved it into his coat without reading it. Come on, he said quietly, not looking at the girl. She didn't move. He glanced down. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, fists clenched at her sides. I won't hurt you, he said, but we need to go. Still, she didn't move. Elias exhaled slowly. He'd never been good with words. He didn't know what to say to a child who'd been sold 3 times before she'd even learned to read. Please, he said. That word seemed to break something. The girl's shoulders sagged. She took one small step forward, then another, following him through the crowd like a shadow that had learned not to be seen. They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Milford, past the saloon and the general store and the boarded-up church. Elia's horse was tied outside the livery. He untied the reins, then paused. "Can you ride?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "All right, you'll ride in front." He lifted her onto the saddle. She weighed almost nothing, then swung up behind her. She sat stiff as a board, hands gripping the saddle horn so tight her knuckles went white. They rode west, out of town, into the open valley where the grass grew long and the sky stretched wide. The sun was sinking low, painting the hills gold and crimson. Elias didn't speak, neither did the girl. But halfway home, as the cabin came into view, small and weathered and alone against the horizon, the girl's voice broke the silence. "What's your name?" Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it in a long time. "Elias," he said. A pause, then, "What do I call you?" "Elias is fine." Another pause, longer this time. What do you want me to do?" Elias felt that twist in his chest again, sharper now. "Nothing tonight," he said. "Tonight you eat and you sleep. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." The girl didn't respond, but her grip on the saddle horn loosened just a little. When they reached the cabin, Elias dismounted and helped her down. She stood in the doorway, staring into the dim interior like it might be a trap. "Go on," Elias said. "It's safe." She stepped inside, slow and cautious. Elias followed, striking a match and lighting the oil lamp on the table. Warm light filled the room, chasing shadows into the corners. The cabin was simple: one room, a bed in the corner, a table, a stove, shelves lined with jars and tools, a rifle mounted above the door. The girl's eyes moved over everything, cataloging, measuring. "You hungry?" Elias asked. She nodded. He moved to the stove, adding wood to the coals, setting a pot of water to boil. He sliced bread, carved strips of salted pork, poured beans into the pot. The girl stood near the door, watching him with the stillness of someone who'd learned that movement drew attention. "Sit," Elias said, nodding toward the table. She sat, hands folded in her lap, eyes down. When the food was ready, Elias set a plate in front of her. She stared at it like she didn't believe it was real. "Eat," he said. She picked up the bread with trembling fingers, took a small bite, then another. Then she ate quickly, mechanically, like someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. Elias ate across from her, saying nothing. When she finished, she set the plate down and finally looked up at him. Her eyes were dark, wary, old beyond her years. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. Elias set down his fork. He'd been asking himself the same question since the moment he'd opened his mouth at that auction. "I don't know," he said honestly. The girl's expression didn't change. "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." "Are you going to sell me again?" "No." "Then what do you want?" Elias looked at her, this girl who'd been sold 3 times, who'd learned not to cry, not to hope, not to trust. And he realized he didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. "I'll work for free," the girl said suddenly, voice rising with desperation. "I'll do whatever you want. Cook, clean, mend, chop wood. I won't complain, I won't run, just don't send me back." Her voice cracked on the last word. Elias felt something break inside him, something he thought had died a long time ago. "I'm not sending you back," he said quietly. The girl stared at him, searching his face for a lie. "I promise," Elias added. She didn't believe him, he could see it in her eyes, but she nodded anyway because what choice did she have? Elias stood, walked to the corner, and pulled a blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed. He handed it to her. "You take the bed tonight," he said. "I'll sleep by the stove." The girl looked at the bed, then back at him. "Why?" "Because you're a child," Elias said, "and children shouldn't sleep on the floor." For the first time since he'd seen her in that auction yard, something flickered in the girl's eyes. Not hope, not trust, but something close to confusion. She took the blanket and moved to the bed, climbing onto it slowly, like she expected it to disappear. She curled up on her side, pulling the blanket to her chin, and closed her eyes. Elias sat by the stove, staring into the dying embers. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. And in the silence of that small cabin, Elias Stone realized he'd just done something he couldn't take back. Morning came cold and grey. Elias woke to the sound of someone moving in the cabin. He sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered. The girl. She was standing by the stove, trying to coax the embers back to life. Her hands were clumsy, uncertain, but determined. "You don't have to do that," Elias said. She startled, spinning around. For a moment, fear flashed across her face. Then she straightened, chin lifting slightly. "You fed me," she said. "I should work." Elias stood, stretching the stiffness from his back. "I told you not today." "Then when?" "When you're ready." The girl frowned, confused. "I'm ready now." Elias moved to the stove, gently taking the poker from her hand. He built up the fire properly, adding kindling first, then larger pieces of wood. The flames caught, crackling to life. "What's your name?" he asked, not looking at her. A long silence. "They called me different things," she said finally. "At the first place I was Mary. At the second I was Anne. At the third," she trailed off. "Does it matter?" Elias turned to face her. "It matters. What do you want to be called?" The girl blinked, like no one had ever asked her that before. I don't know." "Then think about it," Elias said. "Take your time." He made breakfast, cornmeal mush with molasses, coffee for himself, milk for her. They ate in silence again, but this time it felt less heavy. After breakfast, Elias pulled the contract from his coat and laid it on the table. The girl's eyes went to it immediately, body tensing. "This is the paper they gave me," Elias said. "It says you're bound to me for 10 years, says I own your labor, says I can sell you, trade you, or renew the contract when it's up." The girl's face went pale. Elias picked up the contract, held it in both hands, and tore it cleanly in half. The girl gasped. He tore it again and again, until the paper was nothing but scraps. He walked to the stove, opened the door, and tossed the pieces into the fire. They curled and blackened, turning to ash. "You're not bound to me," Elias said, turning back to her. "You're not my property, you're free." The girl stared at the stove, at the ashes of the contract, then back at him. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "You can stay here as long as you want," Elias continued. "You can leave whenever you want. I won't stop you. But if you stay as a guest, not a servant, not a slave." The girl's eyes filled with tears. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. "Why?" she whispered. Elias looked at her, really looked at her, and that's when he saw it. The scar. It ran along the edge of her jaw, thin and pale, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. But Elias knew. He'd seen that scar before. His heart stopped. "What's your real name?" he asked, voice rough. The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I told you, they called me." "Before that," Elias interrupted, "before the placements, before the auction, what was your name?" The girl hesitated, then said quietly, Clara Brennan." The name hit Elias like a fist to the chest. "Brennan." He took a step back, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, alarmed. Elias couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. His mind was racing, pulling up memories he'd buried deep. A farm outside of Lexington, Missouri, a family named Brennan. Elias had been a lieutenant then, leading a Union patrol through contested territory. They'd received orders to arrest suspected Confederate sympathizers, anyone who'd given aid or shelter to Southern soldiers. The Brennan farm had been on the list. Elias had tried to argue, The Brennans were farmers, not soldiers. They had children, but his captain had been clear, orders were orders. They'd surrounded the farm at dawn. Elias had knocked on the door, rifle in hand. A man had answered, tall, weathered, with kind eyes. He'd stepped outside, hands raised, and said, "Whatever you need, son, we'll cooperate." But another soldier, a boy barely 18, nervous and trigger-happy, had seen movement in the barn. He'd fired. Chaos had erupted. The farmer had run toward the barn, shouting. More shots had been fired. By the time Elias had gotten control of his men, the farmer was dead. His wife was dead, and their 2 sons were dead. Elias had gone into the barn, sick with horror, and found a little girl hiding in the hay loft. She was maybe 7 years old, clutching a rag doll, her face streaked with tears. She'd cut her jaw on a nail when she'd fallen, blood dripping down her neck. Elias had wrapped the wound. He'd told her to stay hidden. He'd promised her he'd come back. But his captain had ordered them to move out immediately. Elias had looked back once, just once, and seen the little girl standing in the doorway of the barn, alone. He'd never gone back. "Clara Brennan," Elias said, voice barely above a whisper. Clara was watching him, confusion and fear warring on her face. "How do you know my name?" Elias sank into the chair, suddenly unable to stand. "I was there," he said, "at your farm 5 years ago." Clara's eyes went wide. You were one of the soldiers." Elias nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I should have," his voice broke. "I should have done more." Clara took a step back, then another. Her hand went to her jaw, fingers tracing the scar. "You left me," she said. "You left me alone." "I know. They took me to the orphanage. Then they sold me 3 times, Our voice was shaking now, rising. 3 times, and you left me." "I know," Elias said again, "and I've thought about that day every single day since. I told myself I couldn't have done anything differently, that I was following orders. But the truth is, I was a coward. I should have stayed. I should have protected you." Clara was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you buy me? Did you know it was me?" "No," Elias said, "not until just now, but maybe some part of me knew I had to try, that I couldn't walk away again." Clara stared at him, her small body trembling with rage and grief, and something else Elias couldn't name. "You think that makes it better," she said. "You think buying me and tearing up a piece of paper fixes what happened." "No," Elias said, "it doesn't. Nothing I do will ever fix it. But I can try. I can give you a home. I can keep you safe. I can." He stopped, searching for words. "I can be what I should have been 5 years ago." Clara wiped her eyes roughly. "I don't want your guilt." "I know. I don't forgive you. I know." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and walked to the door, throwing it open. Cold air rushed in. Elias stood, heart pounding. "Clara." "I'm not leaving," she said without looking back. I need air." She stepped outside, leaving the door open behind her. Elias stood in the doorway, watching as she walked to the edge of the property and stood staring out at the valley. The wind pulled at her hair, at the torn hem of her dress. He didn't follow her, he just watched. And he made a silent vow. He would spend the rest of his life trying to make up for that day, even if she never forgave him, even if she left tomorrow. He owed her that much. 3 days passed. Clara stayed. She didn't speak much, but she stayed. She slept in the bed. She ate the meals Elias prepared. She stood on the porch in the mornings, watching the sunrise, and she didn't run. Elias gave her space. He worked the land, mended fences, chopped wood. He left food on the table and didn't ask questions. At night, they sat by the fire in silence, the crackling flames filling the space where words should have been. On the 4th morning, riders appeared on the horizon. Elias saw them from the field, 5 men on horseback moving toward the cabin. He recognized the lead rider immediately. "Sheriff Dalton." Elias set down the post he'd been driving into the ground and walked back toward the cabin. Clara was on the porch, shading her eyes with her hand, watching the riders approach. "Go inside," Elias said quietly. Clara looked at him. "Who are they?" "Lord." Her face went pale. "They're coming for me." "No," Elias said firmly, "they're not." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. The riders slowed as they reached the cabin, horses stamping and snorting. Sheriff Dalton dismounted first. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, with a star pinned to his vest and a revolver on his hip. The four men with him looked like hired guns, hard faces, cold eyes, rifles resting across their saddles. "Elias Stone," Dalton said, tipping his hat. "Been a while." "Sheriff," Elias said evenly. Dalton's eyes moved to Clara, who stood frozen on the porch. "That the girl you bought in Milford?" Elias stepped between them, blocking Dalton's view. "What do you want?" Dalton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just following up on a complaint. Man named Horace Tully says you stole his property." "I didn't steal anything. I paid $60 at a legal auction." "That's not what Tully says. He says the girl was promised to him, says you outbid him out of spite." "Then Tully's a liar." Dalton's smile widened. "Careful, Elias. Horace Tully's a respected man, owns half the land between here and Milford, got friends in high places." "I don't care who his friends are," Elias said. "I bought the girl fair and square. Contract's been settled." "About that," Dalton said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Contract says the girl's bound to you for 10 years, but you never registered it with the county. That makes it invalid." Elias' jaw tightened. "I destroyed the contract." Dalton raised an eyebrow. "You destroyed a legal document." "I did." "Well, that's a problem, because without that contract, the girl's legally unclaimed, which means Tully can petition to have her returned to auction, and since he had the second highest bid, she'd go to him by default." Clara made a small sound behind Elias, barely more than a whimper. "Over my dead body," Elias said. Dalton's expression hardened. "That can be arranged." The four men with him shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their rifles. "You gonna shoot me for protecting a child, Sheriff?" Elias asked. "I'm gonna arrest you for theft and destruction of legal property," Dalton said, "and I'm gonna take that girl back where she belongs." "She belongs here." "That's not for you to decide." Elias took a step forward. "You know what this is, Dalton. You know exactly what this is. Tully's not a respected man. He's a slaver, and you're helping him." Dalton's face flushed. "Watch your mouth." "Or what? You'll arrest me for telling the truth." Elias gestured toward the riders. "You bring 4 armed men to my property, threaten to take a child, and call it law. The war ended 2 years ago. Slavery's done." "This isn't about slavery," Dalton said. "It's about debt. It's about contracts. It's about order." "It's about money," Elias said flatly. "Tully pays you, that's all this is." Dalton's hand moved to his revolver. "Last chance, Stone. Hand over the girl, or I'll take her by force." Elias didn't move. Behind him, he heard Clara's breathing short, panicked, terrified. "No," Elias said. Dalton drew his revolver. The 4 riders raised their rifles. And then a voice called out from the road. "Sheriff Dalton, is there a problem here?" Everyone turned. An older man was riding up the path, flanked by 3 others. Elias recognized him immediately. Samuel Garrett, owner of the largest ranch in the valley. Behind him were 2 of his ranch hands and a man Elias didn't know, dressed in a dark suit. Dalton lowered his revolver slightly. "This is county business, Garrett. Doesn't concern you." Garrett dismounted, slow and deliberate. He was in his 60s, white-haired and broad-shouldered, with eyes like flint. "When 4 armed men show up at a neighbor's door, it concerns me." "Like I said," Dalton repeated, "county business." Garrett looked past Dalton to Elias. "That true, Stone, this man causing you trouble?" Elias nodded. "Says he's taking the girl." "On what grounds?" "Legal grounds," Dalton snapped. "Contract dispute." The man in the dark suit stepped forward. I'm Arthur Keene, attorney. I represent Mr. Garrett and several other landowners in this valley. May I see the contract in question? Dalton hesitated, then handed over the paper. Keene read it carefully, then looked up. This contract is unsigned by the purchaser and unregistered with the county. It's legally void. Exactly, Dalton said. Which means, Keene interrupted, the girl is not legally bound to anyone. Not to Mr. Stone, not to Horace Tully, not to the county. She's a free citizen. Dalton's face darkened. That's not how it works. That's exactly how it works, Keene said. Unless you can produce a valid, signed, registered contract, you have no legal authority to remove this child from Mr. Stone's property. Dalton looked at his men, then back at Garrett. You're making a mistake. No, Garrett said. You are. Now ride out before I send word to the territorial judge about what you're really doing here. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters of the cabin. A crow cawed in the distance. Then Dalton holstered his revolver. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Elias said quietly, it is. Dalton mounted his horse, jaw tight with barely contained rage. He spurred his horse hard, and the four riders followed, thundering back down the road in a cloud of dust. Garrett waited until they were out of sight, then turned to Elias. You all right? Elias nodded, though his hands were shaking. Thank you. Garrett glanced at Clara, who still stood on the porch, wide-eyed and pale. That the girl from the Milford auction? Yes. You know what you're doing, taking her in. No, Elias admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good, this valley needs more men like you. He tipped his hat to Clara. Miss. Clara didn't respond, but she nodded slightly. Garrett and his men rode off, leaving Elias and Clara alone again. Elias turned to face her. She was trembling, arms wrapped around herself. Are they coming back? She asked. I don't know, Elias said honestly. Maybe. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that wasn't fear or anger. It was trust, fragile, uncertain, but real. Thank you, she whispered. Elias nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. If you're still with me, take a breath. Pour yourself something warm, coffee, tea, whatever you've got, and settle in. Because here's the question that changes everything. What do you do when saving someone means facing the worst parts of yourself? If you were Elias, could you look that girl in the eye every day, knowing you were there the day her family died? Could you live with that weight? Think about it, and if you want to see how this story ends, tap subscribe so you don't miss it. 2 weeks passed. The days fell into a rhythm. Elias worked the land. Clara helped where she could, gathering eggs from the chickens Elias had bought in town, hanging laundry to dry, sweeping the porch. She didn't speak much, but she didn't flinch when Elias moved near her anymore. That was progress. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned violet, Elias found Clara standing at the fence line, staring out at the valley. Thinking about leaving, he asked. She glanced at him, then back at the horizon. No. You can, you know, if you want. I know. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Can I ask you something? Clara said finally. Anything. What happened to you after my farm? Elias leaned against the fence, choosing his words carefully. I finished the war, came home, tried to forget. Did you? No. Clara nodded, like she'd expected that answer. I tried to forget too, didn't work. No, Elias said, it doesn't. Another silence, then Clara said, do you think about them, my family? Every day. Clara looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. Really? Really? She turned back to the valley. I don't remember them much anymore. My father's face, my mother's voice, my brother's, it's like they're fading, and I hate that. I hate that I'm forgetting them. Elias' chest tightened. What do you remember? Clara thought for a moment. My mother used to sing. I don't remember the words, but I remember the sound. And my father, he smelled like tobacco and hay. And my brothers, she trailed off, eyes glistening. They used to tease me, called me Little Crow because I was always collecting shiny things. Little Crow, Elias repeated softly. That's a good name. Clara smiled, just a little. It was the first time Elias had seen her smile. Do you have any shiny things now? Elias asked. Clara shook her head, lost them all. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a pocket watch, silver and worn, with an engraving on the back. He'd carried it through the entire war, a gift from his own father before he died. Here, Elias said, holding it out. Clara stared at it. I can't take that. You're not taking it, I'm giving it to you. But it's yours. And now it's yours. Clara hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the watch. She turned it over in her hands, studying the engraving. What does it say? Time heals all wounds, Elias said. My father gave it to me when I enlisted. I don't know if it's true, but I kept it anyway. Clara held the watch close to her chest. Thank you. You're welcome, Little Crow. That night they sat by the fire. Elias carved a piece of wood, a habit from the war, something to keep his hands busy. Clara watched him, the pocket watch resting in her lap. Can you teach me? She asked. Teach you what? To carve. Elias looked up, surprised. You want to learn? Clara nodded. Elias handed her his knife, handle first. All right, but be careful, it's sharp. Clara took the knife and a small piece of wood. She made a tentative cut, then another. The wood splintered. Not like that, Elias said. Here, let me show you. He moved beside her, guiding her hands. You have to cut with the grain, not against it. See. Clara tried again. This time, the cut was cleaner. That's it, Elias said. You've got it. They carved in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind howled, but inside it was warm. Elias, Clara said after a while. Yes. I still don't forgive you. Elias nodded. I know. But she hesitated. I think maybe, someday I could, if you keep being like this. Elias' throat tightened. Like what? Kind, Clara said simply. Elias didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. Clara went back to carving, a small smile on her face. And for the first time since the war ended, Elias felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. A month later, Horace Tully came. He arrived at dusk with 6 men, all armed, all grim-faced. They surrounded the cabin before Elias even heard them coming. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Get off my land. Tully dismounted, a big man with cold eyes and a smile like broken glass. I tried doing this the legal way, Stone. You made it personal. The only person making this personal is you, Elias said. Now leave. Tully shook his head. That girl belongs to me. I paid for her once, and I'll pay again, but first I'm taking back what's mine. She's not yours. We'll see. Tully gestured, and his men raised their rifles. And then from the road came the sound of hoofbeats, lots of them. Everyone turned. Riders were coming from every direction. Samuel Garrett and his ranch hands, the blacksmith from Coldwater, the general store owner, the school teacher, the preacher, men and women, some on horses, some on foot, all converging on Elias' property. Sheriff Dalton was among them, but this time he wasn't with Tully. He was with the townspeople. Garrett rode to the front of the crowd, eyes locked on Tully. Horace, didn't expect to see you here. Tully's jaw tightened. This is private business, Garrett. No, Garrett said. It's not anymore. We've been hearing stories about you, Horace, about the auctions, about the children, about the people you've hurt. That's legal trade, too. Ellie snapped. Not in this valley, Garrett said. Not anymore. The crowd murmured in agreement. Dalton stepped forward, hand on his revolver. Horace Tully, I'm placing you under arrest for trafficking, extortion, and conspiracy. Tully laughed. You work for me, Dalton. Not anymore, Dalton said. I'm done. Tully looked around at the crowd, at the rifles pointed at him, at the faces full of quiet determination. He realized too late that he'd lost. You'll regret this, Tully said. Maybe, Garrett said, but we'll regret it less than doing nothing. Tully and his men were disarmed and escorted out of the valley. The crowd stayed until they were gone, until the dust settled and the stars came out. Then one by one they came to Elias. They shook his hand. They thanked him. They told him he'd done the right thing. Clara watched from the porch, wide-eyed as the townspeople nodded to her, tipped their hats, called her by name. Miss Clara, the schoolteacher said, if you'd like, there's a spot for you in the schoolhouse. We'd be glad to have you. Clara looked at Elias. He nodded. I'd like that, Clara said softly. The schoolteacher smiled. Good, I'll see you Monday. When the last of the townspeople had gone, Elias and Clara stood on the porch, watching the valley settle into night. They came for you, Clara said, voice full of wonder. No, Elias said, they came for you. Clara looked up at him, and this time there were no walls in her eyes, just gratitude, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of forgiveness. 6 months later, Clara sat at the kitchen table, tongue sticking out in concentration as she carved a small wooden crow. She'd gotten good at it. Elias had taught her how to carve feathers, how to shape the beak, how to sand it smooth. What do you think? She asked, holding it up. Elias examined it, turning it over in his hands. I think it's perfect. Clara beamed. Outside, the valley was green and alive. Elias had planted crops. Clara had started a small garden. The cabin, once lonely and silent, was now filled with laughter and light. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara said, Elias. Yes, I forgive you. Elias looked at her, throat tight. Not because you bought me, Clara continued. Not because you tore up the contract, but because you stayed, because you didn't give up on me. Elias blinked back tears. Thank you. Clara leaned against him, and Elias put his arm around her shoulders. Can I call you something else? Clara asked. Like what? She hesitated, then said quietly, Pa. Elias couldn't speak. He just nodded. Clara smiled. Good, because you're the only family I've got. And you're the only family I've got, Elias said. They sat in silence, watching as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver pocket watch. She opened it, listened to it tick, then closed it again. Time heals all wounds, she read aloud. Maybe, Elias said. Or maybe, Clara said, we just learned to carry them better. Elias looked down at her, this girl who'd been broken and sold and abandoned, this girl who'd learned to trust again, and he realized she was right. The scars didn't disappear, the guilt didn't vanish, the ghosts didn't leave. But you learned to live with them, you learned to carry them, and sometimes, if you were lucky, you found someone to carry them with you. The stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. And in the quiet of that valley, Elias Stone and Clara Brennan, father and daughter, not by blood but by choice, sat together and watched the night unfold.